In this lesson, we will begin studying one of the most important and influential events in European history, the French Revolution. The first thing we will examine is the medieval social structure of France, and how the inequalities of this system led to revolution. We will then look at the economic and political problems of France in the 1700s, and how these also contributed to the start of the revolution. Next, we will examine how the revolution began with the formation of a group called the National Assembly that began to make important reforms. We will finish by talking about the storming of the Bastille, a prison in Paris, and how this marked an important break with France's history of absolute monarchy. In the 1700s, France was considered the most advanced country in Europe. It was the center of the Enlightenment, had a large population, and enjoyed a prosperous trade. France's culture and artistic achievements were widely praised and emulated by the rest of Europe. However, the appearance of success was deceiving. There was great unrest in France as the legacy of extravagant absolute monarchy left by Louis XIV clashed with social, economic, and political problems, as well as the difficult questions about liberty and government raised by the thinkers of the Enlightenment. In 1789, France still clung to an outdated social system that had emerged in the Middle Ages. Under this ancien regime, or old order, everyone in France was divided into one of three social classes, or estates. The first estate was made up of the clergy of the Catholic Church, the second estate was made up of the nobility, and the third estate comprised the vast majority of the population. The first and second estates together accounted for about 1 to 2% of the French population, while the third estate represented the remaining 98% of the country. During the Middle Ages, the Church exerted great influence throughout Christian Europe. In 1789, the French clergy still enjoyed enormous wealth and privilege. The Church owned about 10% of the land, collected tithes, or taxes levied on the people to pay for the Church and the services it provided, and paid no taxes to the state. High Church leaders, such as bishops and abbots, the heads of monasteries, were usually nobles who lived very well. Parish priests, however, often came from humble origins, and might be as poor as their peasant congregations. The First Estate did provide some important social services. For example, nuns, monks, and priests ran schools, hospitals, and orphanages. But during the Enlightenment, the philosophes targeted the Church for reform. They criticized the idleness and extravagance of many members of the clergy, the Church's interference in politics, and its intolerance of dissent. In response, many clergy condemned the Enlightenment for undermining religion and moral order. The second estate was the titled nobility of French society. In the Middle Ages, noble knights had defended the land. In the 1600s, Richelieu and Louis XIV had crushed the nobles' military power, but had compensated them by granting them other rights. These rights included top jobs in the government, the army, the courts, and the church. Since the reign of Louis XIV, ambitious nobles had competed for royal appointments, while others frittered away their time in endless entertainment. Many nobles, however, lived far from the center of power. Though they owned land, changes in the economy and fluctuations in the weather in the late 1700s meant that they received little financial income. As a result, they felt the pinch of trying to maintain their status in a period of rising prices. Many nobles hated absolutism and resented the royal bureaucracy that employed middle-class men in positions that had once been reserved for them. They feared losing their status and traditional privileges, especially their freedom from paying taxes. By the 1780s, many nobles were anxious to regain the political power and influence they had lost since the reign of Louis XIV. The third estate was the most diverse social class. At the top sat the bourgeoisie, or middle class, who were mostly wealthy and well-educated. This group included prosperous bankers, merchants, and manufacturers, as well as lawyers, doctors, journalists, and professors. The bulk of the third estate consisted of rural peasants. Some were prosperous landowners who hired laborers to work for them, but most were poor and worked as either tenant farmers or day laborers. The poorest members of the third estate were urban workers. They included apprentices, journeymen, and others who worked in industries such as printing and cloth-making. Many women and men in urban areas earned a meager living as servants, stable hands, construction workers, or small shopkeepers who sold food, pots, candles, and other goods. A large number of the urban poor were unemployed, and some of these resorted to begging or crime to survive. From rich to poor, members of the Third Estate resented the privileges enjoyed by their social betters. Wealthy bourgeois families in the Third Estate could buy political offices and even noble titles, but the best jobs were still reserved for the aristocracy. Urban workers earned miserable wages and faced the constant risk of unemployment as the population increased and the labor supply outgrew the number of available jobs. Even the smallest rise in the price of bread, the main food for the majority of the population, brought the threat of great hunger or even starvation to the poor in both the cities and the countryside. Because of their traditional privileges, the First and Second Estate paid almost no taxes, while peasants were burdened with taxes on everything from land to soap to salt. Though they were not serfs and technically free, many owed fees and services that dated back to medieval times, such as the corvée, which was unpaid labor to repair roads and bridges. Peasants were also incensed when nobles, hurt by rising prices, tried to reimpose old fees and dues. As Enlightenment ideas and economic hardship spread through the towns and cities, many people began to question why the First and Second Estates should enjoy such great privileges at the expense of the majority. Throughout France, the Third Estate called for the privileged classes to pay their fair share. Economic woes added to the social unrest and heightened tensions. One of the main causes of the economic troubles in France was a financial crisis that was due in part to years of deficit spending, in which the government was spending more money than it took in through fees and taxes, causing it to have to go into debt to pay its bills. When Louis XIV died in 1715, he left France deeply in debt. France's participation in the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution strained the treasury even further. Extravagant spending on the royal court at Versailles made this financial crisis even worse. As prices increased in the 1700s, it cost the government more and more to maintain the army, bureaucracy, and the lavish lifestyles of the monarchs. To bridge the gap between income and expenses, the government crushed the common people with heavy taxes and borrowed more and more money. By 1789, half of the government's income from taxes went to paying the interest on this enormous debt. Also, in the late 1780s, poor weather led to a series of bad harvests that caused grain shortages. As a result, food prices soared, and this led to hunger for poor peasants and city dwellers. To solve the financial crisis, the government would have to increase taxes, reduce expenses, or both. However, the nobles and clergy fiercely resisted any attempt to end their exemption from taxes. The heirs of Louis XIV were not the right men to solve the economic crises that afflicted France. Louis XV, who ruled from 1715 to 1774, pursued pleasure before serious business, and ran up more debts by dragging France into the 7 Years' War. Indecisive and easily influenced, Louis XVI was ill-prepared to guide the nation through turbulent times. When he was born in 1754, he was fourth in line for the throne. By age 10, however, he was the direct heir. Uneasy with this responsibility, he set out to prepare himself emotionally and mentally for his duties. He was not a stellar student, though he did have a great memory and an interest in history and languages. When he became king at the young age of 20 in 1774, he is said to have claimed, "I am the unhappiest of men." A main reason for Louis's unpopularity and difficulty was his wife, the Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. Louis had married Marie as part of France's alliance with its former enemy Austria. The French people resented Marie for her Austrian ancestry and despised her for her behavior. Marie was young and frivolous, and spent so extravagantly that she was nicknamed Madame Deficit. One of Louis XVI's few wise moves was his appointment of Jacques Necker, a financial expert, as an advisor. Necker was popular with the French people and urged the king to reduce the lavish spending of the court, reform the corrupt government, and abolish burdensome tariffs on internal trade. When Necker proposed taxing the First and Second Estates, however, the nobles and high clergy objected and forced the king to dismiss him. This ended any hope of meaningful reform. As the crisis deepened, the pressure for change mounted. The wealthy and powerful classes demanded, however, that the king summon the Estates General, the legislative body consisting of representatives from each of the three estates, before making any changes. A French king had not called the Estates General for 175 years, fearing that nobles would use it to recover feudal powers they had lost since the 1600s. To reform-minded nobles, the Estates General seemed to offer a chance of carrying out changes like those that had come with the Glorious Revolution in England. They hoped that they could bring the monarchy under the control of the nobility and guarantee their own rights and privileges. As 1788 came to a close, France tottered on the verge of bankruptcy and civil war. Hunger and unemployment stalked the land, bread riots were spreading, and nobles fearful of taxation denounced the king as a tyrant. A baffled Louis XVI finally summoned the Estates General to meet at Versailles the following year. In preparation, Louis had all three states prepare cahiers, or notebooks, listing their grievances. Many cahiers called for reform such as fair taxes, freedom of the press, or regular meetings of the Estates General. The notebooks testified to boiling class resentments. One referred to tax collectors as bloodsuckers, while another referred to the nobles who controlled the courts as vampires. The delegates to the Estates General from the Third Estate were elected, though only men with property could vote. As a result, the delegates were mostly lawyers, middle-class officials, and writers. They were wealthy and well-educated. Most of them were familiar with the writings of Voltaire, Rousseau, and other Enlightenment thinkers. They went to Versailles not only to solve the financial crisis, but also to insist on political reforms. The Estates General convened in May of 1789, and from the start ran into trouble. The delegates were deadlocked over the issue of voting. Under the Assembly's traditional medieval rules, each estate had met and voted separately. Each group had one vote. Under this system, the First and Second Estates always outvoted the Third Estate 2-1. This time, the Third Estate wanted all three estates to meet in a single body, with votes counted by delegate. This would give the advantage to the Third Estate, which had as many delegates as the other two states combined. The Third Estate delegates enjoyed support from a few delegates from the First and Second Estate. For example, the low-ranking clergyman Abbé Sieyès was a strong supporter of the Third Estate. He wrote the most famous and influential pamphlet of the period, entitled What is the Third Estate? It was published in January 1789 and played an important role in inspiring a desire for social and political change in France. In the pamphlet, Sieyès boldly stated, "What is the Third Estate? Everything. What has it been up to now in the political order? Nothing. What does it demand? To become something herein." The king and nobility refused to compromise with the Third Estate delegates and their supporters. After weeks of stalemate, the delegates took the daring step of leaving the Estates General. On June 17, 1789, the delegates voted to establish themselves as the new National Assembly and pass laws and reforms in the name of the French people. This action in effect proclaimed the end of absolute monarchy and the beginning of representative government in France. It was the first deliberate act of revolution. A few days later, the National Assembly found its meeting hall locked and guarded. Fearing that the king planned to dismiss them, the delegates moved to a nearby indoor tennis court. As curious spectators looked on, the delegates took their famous tennis court oath. In this pledge, the delegates vowed to continue meeting until they had drawn up a new constitution for France. They swore never to separate, and to meet wherever the circumstances might require until we've established a sound and just constitution. When reform-minded clergy and nobles joined the assembly, Louis XVI grudgingly accepted it. But royal troops gathered around Paris, and rumors spread that the king planned to dissolve the assembly. Fearing for the safety of his throne, Louis stationed his mercenary army of Swiss guards in Paris, since he no longer trusted the loyalty of the French soldiers. In Paris, the people feared that these foreign troops were coming to massacre the residents of the city. People gathered weapons in order to defend Paris against the king's foreign troops, but feared they would not have enough to protect themselves. On July 14, 1789, 800 Parisians assembled outside the Bastille, a grim medieval fortress used as a prison for political and other prisoners. The crowd demanded weapons and gunpowder that were believed to be stored inside. The commander of the Bastille refused to open the gates and opened fire on the crowd. In the battle that followed, many people were killed. Finally, the enraged mob broke through the defenses and stormed the fortress. They killed the commander and 5 guards and released a handful of prisoners that were being held there, but found no weapons. The Bastille was a symbol to the people of France, representing years of abuse by the monarchy. The storming of and subsequent fall of the Bastille was a wake-up call to Louis XVI. Unlike any other riot or short-lived protest, this event posed a challenge to the sheer existence of the regime. It became a great symbolic act of revolution to the French people. The political crises of 1789 had coincided with the worst famine in memory. Starving peasants roamed the countryside or flocked to towns, where they swelled the ranks of the hungry and unemployed. As grain prices soared, even people with jobs had to spend as much as 80% of their income on bread. In such desperate times, rumors ran wild and set off what was later called the Great Fear. Tales of attacks on villages by wild outlaws hired by greedy nobles spread panic, as did other rumors that government troops were seizing peasant crops. Inflamed by famine and fear, peasants unleashed their fury on nobles who were trying to reimpose old medieval dues in order to sustain their lifestyle in difficult times. Defiant peasants set fire to old manor records, burned the homes of the wealthy, and stole grain from storehouses. The attacks died down after a period of time, but they clearly demonstrated peasant anger with an unjust regime. Following the storming of the Bastille, and as the Great Fear swept the countryside, the city of Paris was in turmoil. As the capital and chief city of France, it was the center of revolutionary activity. A variety of factions competed to gain power and direct the course of the unfolding revolution. Moderates looked to the Marquis de Lafayette, the aristocratic hero of 2 worlds, who fought alongside George Washington in the American Revolution. Lafayette headed the National Guard, a largely middle-class militia organized in response to the arrival of royal troops in Paris. The National Guard was the first group to wear the tricolor, a red, white, and blue badge that was eventually adopted as the national flag of France. A more radical group, the Paris Commune, replaced the royal government of the city. The leaders of the Commune were interested in major social and economic changes. The Commune could mobilize whole neighborhoods for protests or violent action to further the revolution. Now that we have completed this lesson, examine the questions on this slide. After I finish speaking, pause the video and see if you can answer them based on what you have heard. Use this as a way to help you review for the assessments.